It's Bucket. In my last few Ars videos, we've learned how to get started with Ars, how to put together our spells, and how to do insane amounts of damage. So by now we've seen that Ars Nouveau can be pretty powerful. And now it's time to learn how we can use this mod to further our advantage. In this video, we're gonna learn how to delete mobs, teach your armor how to use Ars, and how we can get infinite health and infinite mana. Now before we get started, do note that there will be things that I'll mention in this video that I won't be explaining in as much detail because I did cover it in previous videos. If you need some more background, this is the video you should be watching and it'll give you an introduction to Ars Spellcrafting. I've also made a playlist of all of my Ars guides so you can watch them all together. I'll leave all of this in the description below. Now when dealing with mobs, one scenario that comes up fairly often in AllTheMods 10 is dealing with the dungeon in the other dimension. This is of course where you need to go to get the unobtainium smithing template. This area has a ton of spawners that have a very fast spawn rate, which will also include evokers which will summon Vexus on top of all of that. Very annoying to deal with. Now we can use our spell from my last video. I've even made some adjustments to our spell to make it more usable in this scenario. I'm mostly talking about lag, but this spell was mostly designed so we can min-max our damage. And not to mention it was quite a number of steps. And well, you might not always have access to things like the Rage Glove. But also part of the beauty of Ars Nouveau is that there are many ways in which we can tackle the problem before us. So we're going to be doing some problem solving here. And I'm going to be using this opportunity to show you some neat tricks. Now I'm actually going to give you a number of different solutions. And you'll be able to see the benefits of each of these options and how they might prove useful to you in your own playthroughs. First, the insta-kill spell. Well, kind of. So for your form glyph, you can use whatever you like, but personally, I'd recommend the Ray glyph. Ray is essentially a ranged touch glyph. That means that it will instantly apply the effects of your spell to something from a distance, which means that unlike a projectile glyph, you won't have to worry as much about your spell missing. So by itself, Ray is going to give us a range of 16 blocks. So augmenting this with one AoE glyph is going to give us plenty of range, but we can easily add more if need be, with each AoE glyph adding an additional 16 blocks. Now our actual spells can be based around the blink glyph, and we're going to be using this to teleport our enemies. Now how this is going to work is we can teleport mobs to a location based on a warp scroll that we hold in our offhand, and it'll do so without consuming the warp scroll. Now the thing with this spell is if you don't hit an enemy, you end up teleporting yourself to that location. So to work around that, we're going to use the filter entity glyph. This will mean that our spell will only go off if it hits an entity. Now this spell as it is costs 100 mana, which means that we can actually use our spell in a spellbinder with a threat of cheap damage, which reduces our cost by 100 mana. And if my math is correct, this will mean that we can cast our spell for free. Now specifically, more than likely, you're going to need a stabilized warp scroll, because unlike a normal warp scroll, this scroll will work between dimensions. To prepare the warp scroll, of course, we'll need to go to the location where we want to teleport the mobs to, and then just like a regular warp scroll, we can hold the warp scroll and shift right click, and that'll save the location to the warp scroll. Now this isn't actually an issue, but just so you're aware, right clicking with the scroll will actually spawn a portal. This shouldn't spawn in the dungeon, but if it does, just make sure not to go through the portal. So where should you teleport these mobs? Well, a couple of suggestions. You could teleport them to your mob farm kill chamber. You could set up an industrial foregoing mob crusher, which will pretty much delete mobs, or you could just teleport them into the void somewhere in the end or the beyond dimension. And of course, wherever you do choose, make sure it's chunk loaded. Now, whilst this does do what it's supposed to do, a single target spell is less than ideal when dealing with this many mobs. So in addition, we can also add the chaining glyph, and this will do pretty much exactly what it sounds like it'll do. It'll chain our spell to nearby mobs, meaning everything's getting teleported, which with this spell works pretty flawlessly. So in this scenario, I'm running the Vibranium Arcanist set, but I don't have any additional mana regeneration. But as you can see, we're quickly running low on mana. Now there are ways that we can work around this, and some of those I've already mentioned in previous videos. But I do have another solution, but we'll be coming back to that a little later. So just a quick note, I wasn't having issues with this spell in AllTheMods 10 version 4.15, but on version 5.1, there were some issues. But the devs are now aware of this issue as well as what's causing it, so I'm sure that all of that's going to get sorted. In the meantime, this issue happens when we're teleporting mobs over large distances or across different dimensions. So with what we're doing, that just means that you have to set up a mob crusher somewhere closer in the same dimension. So for example, somewhere on the top side of the dungeon would work. But moving on, the Reactive Enchantment. This enchantment works by applying a spell onto a piece of gear or a weapon or tool. First, the spell that we want to use needs to be put on a spell parchment. If you're not familiar, we can create a spell parchment by putting a blank parchment onto a scribe's table, and then with your spell selected, shift click with your spellbook. Now normally to apply the enchantment as well as your spell, you need to go through the crafting recipe using the enchanting apparatus. After that, there are recipes for upgrading your enchantment all the way to level 4. But of course, there are other ways of getting reactive 4. So we can start by using the enchanting apparatus to get the level 1 reactive enchantment. Then we can disenchant our piece of gear. Then using one of the enchantment printers, we can dupe our enchantment, combine both enchantments in an anvil to get reactive 2. Then we can dupe this enchantment by putting it through the enchantment printer, and so on until we get to reactive 4. But once you do have the Reactive 4 enchantment, the enchanting apparatus is still going to be what we're going to use to put the spell onto our piece of gear. And to do that, all you have to do is put the spell parchment on a pedestal and then place your piece of gear in the enchanting apparatus. And this will work the same way if you want to change the spell as well. So with the Reactive enchantment on a weapon or tool, whenever we left click, it'll cast the spell we put on it. But on a piece of armor, it'll cast a spell whenever we get hit. So the spell actually only has a chance of being cast, and this is based on the level of enchantment, with Reactive level 4 giving you a 100% chance of your spell to be cast. So we're actually going to be using our spell from earlier, but we're going to put this onto our Reactive enchantment. Specifically, we're going to use Retaliate Blink. Now, Retaliate is a form glyph that will cast a spell on something that attacked you within the last 5 seconds. So really, this works perfectly with the Reactive enchantment. But remember, this will only really work as intended if you're also holding the warp scroll in your offhand. But then, anything that hits you will get teleported into your kill chamber. Now, do note that you can't exactly turn this off, so I wouldn't put this on your main piece of gear. Now, on the other hand, when the Reactive enchantment does cast a spell, it'll use your mana. So Reactive Blink costs 75 mana. So that means we could cast this for free if we equipped 4 rings of greater discount. But this spell is only really good if we can take all of those hits, right? Let's do something about that. The Life Link glyph. Using this on a mob is going to link your health in a sense. If you take damage, the mob is going to take some of that damage instead. And if that mob is healed, you're going to get some of that healing as well. It's kind of like you're sharing a health bar, except that you're getting all the benefits. Now, this probably sounds like something we can take advantage of, right? But if we're going to do that, the first thing that we're going to need to do is make this lifelink permanent. And we're going to be doing that by using a rune. A rune is similar to a turret and can automate spells that start with a touch glyph. A temporary rune can be placed with a rune glyph. Otherwise, you can draw a permanent one using runic chalk. But you can also use runic chalk to make a temporary rune permanent. As for the spell, you can either incorporate it together with the rune glyph in your spell, or you can add the spell separately using a spell parchment. Now, one thing that's important to know is that casting a rune with sensitive will act as if we're the ones that are casting the spell. Without it, it'll be as if the rune is casting the spell. And this won't work with our lifelink spell. So with all of that in mind, this is going to be the spell that we're going to use to cast our lifelink rune, and then we're going to be using runic chalk to make it permanent. Do note that similarly to turrets, the rune is going to need some source nearby in order to cast our spell. So what mob should we use for this? Well, if you didn't know, a witch actually heals itself when it gets damaged. So this is actually kind of the perfect mob. We don't actually need to do anything else. Let's see how this goes in practice. Okay, not bad. So it's able to keep our health up whilst we're taking constant damage from this Vindicator. So this is probably fine for keeping up your health against some small mob encounters, but it's definitely going to struggle keeping us alive in the other. All that means for us is that we're going to have to provide additional healing. And if we need a lot of healing, we might want a mob with a bigger health pool. So we've swapped out our witch for an iron golem. 100 health should be a pretty good buffer. But back to healing, this can be as simple as setting up a spell turret with a healing spell. Spell turrets are triggered with a redstone pulse. Here I'm using a timer from RF Tools. And remember, of course, each cast is going to cost source. So faster redstone pulse means more spells are going to be cast, meaning you'll need more source. So you'll just have to make sure that you're supplying enough of it. Also, small PSA, I know these spell sounds can be annoying, so remember that you can turn off the sounds for these by customizing your spells. But also note that when you aren't customizing these customizations are specific to each spell slot. Then you want to go and customize the form glyph that you're using. And there'll be a sound on spawn and another on resolve. And we can switch these both out to no sound. So much better. Now, if you're playing AllTheMods 10, of course, we have other healing options. Surely there's like a silly block that gives stupid amounts of healing. So I've gone ahead and put our Iron Golem on a stasis chamber. This will give it constant healing, but will also stop it from moving around. One annoying thing about using this though is that for some reason, this does stop the rune from activating. But we can still activate it by setting up a little dropper setup. So I'm using a Just I Think simple dropper and an item collector. And the main reason for that is that we can set up a small pickup delay in the dropper and enable the respect item pickup delay option on the item collector. Now make sure the item collector is set to pick up directly in front of the dropper, and then just throw any item in the dropper to start the cycle. Now just be aware that if you have a magnet, it's going to try and pick up the item as well. A demagnetization coil can help, but just know that it doesn't work for all magnets. Now if you're not familiar with stasis chambers, what really makes them shine is if you have higher tier add-ons. So ideally, you're going to want tier 4 add-ons. The add-ons will definitely give you the most benefit, but if you wanted more healing after that, you could also add more stasis chambers, or you can even soul search them. But which is the better option? Now the healing spell I'm using here, I'm only using 10 glyphs. And here, I'm actually running the turret every 20 ticks. And surprisingly, this actually seems to easily outperform the stasis chamber. So there you go. Now, if we take a closer look at our Iron Golem's health, you can see the health is dipping occasionally into the 80s and even sometimes the 70s. Now, if you want to truly mitigate as much damage as possible, you're going to want more frequent heals as opposed to bigger heals. And all that means is that we're going to need to speed up the redstone clock, which again though, keep in mind, that's going to mean that it's going to cost more source in order to run. So here I've got it running as fast as possible, which means I've set the timer to every 2 ticks. And as you can see, the Iron Golem's health is barely dipping at all. Now let's see how this goes in practice. Alright, so for this, I'm going in with a Vibranium Arcanist with nothing extra on it, and that's it. So good luck to me. Oh, it's definitely busy down here. And so now we just let it happen. And it works. Damn, doesn't even hurt a bit. You can't even tell that we're taking damage sometimes. Hey, so I wonder how this would go if we took off our armor. Oh, I didn't even know what we're worried about. Well, I guess we're kind of invincible now. Wait, I have an idea. Let's see how this goes. You guys even trying? Not even a challenge. We're too powerful. Take a good look, ladies and gentlemen. This is what peak performance looks like. Now, if we wanted to truly take advantage of our spells, it always comes down to the same problem. Everything just starts to cost so much mana. So what are we supposed to do about that? And this, my friends, is where things get juicy. Because now it's time for me to teach you how to cheat at Ars Nouveau using Ars Nouveau. And by that I mean, we're gonna get infinite mana. And the secret is this, the Jar of Voiding. Now I have talked about this before, but essentially when you're mining, based on the filter that you set on the void jar, it'll void items and in exchange will give you mana. Now if we cast our break spell, it's gonna give us a ton of blocks to void, giving us more mana to cast our break spell, giving us a ton of blocks to void, giving us more mana to cast our break spell, to give us a ton of blocks to void, giving us more mana to cast our break spell, giving us a ton of blocks to void, giving us more mana to cast our break spell, giving us a ton of blocks to void, giving us more mana. But Bucket, doesn't this only work if you're mining? Oh, we're just getting started. So our Jar of Voiding works by turning blocks into mana. But what if we just kept sending blocks to our inventory? Like using the export card from Applied Logistics or player accessor from Just Our Things? Unfortunately, these won't work the way we need it to. But of course, there is a way that we can do this using Ars Nouveau. But before we do that, we're gonna need blocks. The more mana you want, the more blocks you're gonna need. So one easy solution could be that you use the Infinity Cobblestone cell from Applied Logistics. But this is an Ars video. And so of course, I'm gonna be showing you a way that you can do this using Ars Nouveau. So for our setup, we're gonna place a manipulation turret on top of a drawer. For the drawer, make sure to put some upgrades in it and do not forget the void upgrade. Otherwise, you might accidentally lag out your game. Of course, you'll need source nearby and a redstone clock to activate the turret. Now here I've got an obsidian block 4 blocks above the turret, and 4 blocks is gonna be the minimum distance that'll work with the spell that we're using. Now more recently, using this turret's a little bit different, and we have to use the Dominion one to tell it where to fire our spell. So we're gonna use the Dominion one on the turret and then on the obsidian block. Now for whatever reason, sometimes that your turret will decide that it wants to shoot your spell 1 block off from where you told it to. If this happens, just move your obsidian block over until your turret is hitting it. You can assign the turret a spell with just the form glyph just to make it easier to test. So here's the spell that we're going to be using. Once again, I'm going to be using the ray glyph here, but otherwise the projectile glyph will work just fine. So the burst is going to be our shape, and then we're going to be using conjured terrain, which is going to fill our shape with dirt blocks. Now because we're using a manipulation turret, it allows our break spell to target the dirt blocks that we just made. And similarly, the pickup glyph will then pick up the dirt blocks and deposit them into the drawer. And this is important to know because if you don't use a manipulation turret, you're going to get this mess instead. Of course, if you want more blocks, you can make the spell bigger by adding more AoE glyphs. If you do that, you're going to want to make sure the obsidian block is further away from your turret. Now if it wasn't already obvious, this is a bit of a lag factory. So just keep that in mind if you're going to use this. Now that we have our blocks sorted, to get those blocks to our inventory, we're actually going to be taking advantage of an interaction that we went through earlier. A rune augmented with sensitive that has an item pickup spell in it will send those items to the inventory of the caster. That's us. We're going to have our rune under the drawer. And don't forget to use runic chalk to make it permanent. Then all we need is something to drop the blocks fast enough onto the rune. And once again, we can do both of these things using Ars. I'm going to have an enchanted turret next to our drawer, and if we assign a toss spell to it, it can pull the dirt out of the drawer onto the rune. On its own, the toss spell will throw a stack at a time, but each amplified glyph will actually double the stack size. And since I know some of you are going to do some crazy things, just so you know, 7 amplifiers is where my PC starts to struggle. So use that information wisely. Of course, both the rune and the turret would need source to run, which you would already have if you set up the dirt automation. And the turret will also need a redstone clock as well. After that, I like to box in the rune just to make sure the dirt doesn't go anywhere. Last but not least, don't forget to set up your void jar. Put a dirt block in your offhand and right click with the void jar to add it to the filter. Then shift right click in the air with the void jar to activate it. And if it wasn't already obvious, you need to keep this in your inventory the whole time. And if you forget, well, I'm sure you'll know about it. Now, although we do have a working setup now, our rune should still take some time to recharge. Although for some reason this wasn't the case when I set this up earlier, but this isn't supposed to happen. Oh, but I know there are these kinds of players out there. When you think infinite mana, you want to be able to spam your spells like no tomorrow. Now the workaround for this is quite simple. We're going to revisit our rune spell, but we'll need to start this with the projectile glyph. So apparently if we get our turret to cast the rune sensitive pickup spell, it still acts as if we're the ones that cast the spell. Or more importantly, items that are picked up are still going to end up in our inventory. Then we're going to be adding a reset glyph. And after that, we can add our toss spell at the end of it. And let's say 3 amplifies. Now we can set our timer to 2 ticks. And moment of truth, I'm spamming. Now, if you feel like you don't know how to make use of your limitless mana, I'd strongly suggest watching the first video of my spellcrafting series, as I break down how to craft your own spells, and I don't mean how to make a spell that breaks 1 block at a time. I mean how to make good spells. One thing that I mentioned in the video is what I tend to call shape glyphs. Just like how we use the chaining glyph in this video, these are what allow you to target a lot of things at once. It's just that usually it's hard to use these spells because they're quite expensive. But of course, that's no longer an issue for us. And of course, you can always just spam augment glyphs to make the biggest versions possible of your existing spells. So for example, blink to cover large distances, as each teleport teleport, we're able to travel about 60 blocks. We can use an evaporate spell to get rid of fluids. And by that, I mean you can easily vaporize entire lakes. Maybe a simple harm spell to get rid of a bunch of mobs. Of course, you can always use this with retaliate on a reactive enchantment. And speaking of reactive enchantments, why not make it so you get a nice big heal every time you get hit, or a nice big shield, or you have 4 pieces of armor, so why not all of the above? And of course, you can always just cause absolute chaos. Cast a spell that casts more spells, that cast even more spells, and more spells on top of that. But you should never use a spell like this, because it would be incredibly bad for performance. But if you do still have questions, feel free to join the Discord. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for the most detailed and informative AllTheMods 10 related content. Otherwise, thanks for watching, I'm Bucket, and I'll see you in the next one.